Welcome back, everyone. Today we are diving right into a truly clinical breakdown of a perfectly crafted, ultra-realistic cinematic horror short. In this explainer, we're going to look at the absolute precision required to terrify an audience in under a minute. We'll be deconstructing the lighting, the sound design, the camera movements, and all those sneaky psychological traps that professional horror cinematographers use to manufacture dread. If you love understanding how things work behind the scenes, you are in for an absolute treat.
Okay, let's dive into this. A 45 to 60-second narrative arc with a clear beginning, rising tension, and a dark ending. This isn't just some loose description. It's literally a rigid mathematical formula for fear. When a filmmaker has barely a minute to work with, there is absolutely zero room for filler. Every single frame, every single shadow, and every little sound has to be weaponized to push your heart rate up. It's a masterclass in efficiency, and we're going to see exactly how this rising tension is architected from the ground up.
Here's our cinematic blueprint for today. We'll cover the anatomy of a horror short, setting the visual baseline, sound design and escalation, the flashlight mechanic, and finally, executing the perfect scare.
Let's jump straight into Section 1, Anatomy of a Horror Short, the 60-second escalation model. Now, what's really interesting about this is how tight horror relies entirely on a strictly controlled timeline. You have to build a world, introduce a threat, and execute a terrifying climax in just 1 minute. Look at how this exact pacing perfectly mirrors that arc of a clear beginning, rising tension, and a dark ending. Check out these 15-second intervals. 0 to 15 seconds gives us the setup. Our protagonist is simply reading on the couch. 15 to 30 seconds introduces the anomaly, those slow knocks and the trip to the peephole. 30 to 45 seconds forces her into a super vulnerable position in the dark hallway where the flashlight dies. And those final 15 seconds? The climax and the abrupt fade to black. It's just a perfectly symmetrical escalation of terror.
Moving on to Section 2, Setting the Visual Baseline, Isolation and Dread. Before the real action even starts, the filmmaker has to make us feel isolated, right? Look at how highly specific character design and setting details build an ultra-realistic reality right from the opening frame. We've got a young woman in her mid-20s. Her brown hair is tied up in a loose bun, and she's wearing a gray, oversized sweater. She's completely alone in an old house on a rainy night. And guys, none of these choices are accidental. The messy bun and oversized sweater immediately communicate comfort and vulnerability. She's in her safe space. The old house and the rainy night, they instantly isolate her from the outside world. By the time you process all these details, you already feel this subconscious sense of unease.
And blanketing that whole setup is a foundational cinematic choice. We're talking about a consistent, cold, blue-gray color grading used throughout the scene. This isn't just an aesthetic preference. This color grading sets an eerie visual baseline that literally primes the audience's psychology for what's next. Blue and gray tones visually drain the warmth and life out of the room. It reinforces feelings of coldness, isolation, and suspense. You actually feel a chill in the air before the first knock even happens.
All right, Section 3, Sound Design and Escalation, the Audio Trap.
Horror is really only half visual. In our source material, the tense, ambient sound design is just as crucial as the visuals in manipulating our stress levels. Let's walk through this audio escalation. It starts out calmly enough with Step 1, the ambient rain outside. That's a sound we usually find relaxing. But then, Step 2 happens. 3 slow knocks at the front door. They completely break the rhythm of the rain. She hesitates. Then, Step 3, a sudden, louder knock that startles her backward. And this is exactly where the audio shifts from realistic to psychological. Step 4 introduces a tense heartbeat into the sound design, syncing right up with the audience's own rising pulse. And finally, Step 5, the devastatingly intimate sound of slow breathing right behind her in the dark. But there's this absolutely crucial moment of audio-visual synergy I've got to highlight right before the climax. She walks through the door and peeks through the peephole, and she sees absolutely nothing but darkness. This moment of total nothingness, right before that sudden, louder knock startles her back, is incredible. It is the catalyst. The total absence of a visible threat outside is exactly what forces our protagonist to turn around, grab a flashlight, and venture into that dark hallway inside.
Which brings us to Section 4, the flashlight mechanic, sensory deprivation.
And this brilliantly illustrates how, once she steps into that dark hallway, the narrative uses lighting as a psychological weapon, not just against her, but against us. As she walks cautiously, the flashlight flickers. In that tiny, brief fluctuation of light, a tall, shadowy figure passes across the wall behind her. It's completely unnoticed by her, but seen by us.
Then the flashlight suddenly dies, leaving her in near darkness. We are stripped of our vision right at the exact moment we know she's in danger. Finally, when she hears that breathing and turns around, the flashlight flickers back on, revealing the horrific truth. The delayed flickering flashlight hides the antagonist and manipulates our anticipation, stretching out the anxiety until it's almost unbearable.
So, picture it. We have a terrified protagonist in the dark, an unearthly breathing sound right behind her, and a flickering flashlight about to expose the threat. The tension is at its absolute peak. But how does the camera itself actually react to this final terrifying reveal?
Let's look at Section 5, Executing the Perfect Scare, the Climax.
We are now in the very last 15 seconds of the timeline. This is where all that careful, slow buildup explodes into absolute sensory overload. When that flashlight flicks back on, the reveal is just devastating. We see this pale, gaunt figure. Its eyes are completely hollow and black. And the absolute most terrifying detail? The proximity. It is literally inches from her face. The visceral physical reaction of the protagonist is instant. She screams, she stumbles backward in total panic, and drops the flashlight. It is just a masterpiece of close-quarters horror.
Let's see how this builds a violent visual contrast. On the baseline side, for 45 whole seconds, we were conditioned by consistent, cold blue-gray color grading and incredibly slow, suspenseful camera movements. But look at the climax. The exact moment of the jump scare, the lighting briefly flashes to red and the camera just breaks into a violent shake. This sudden juxtaposition, going from slow and blue to fast, shaking, and red, is the literal anatomy of a perfect cinematic jump scare. It shocks the viewer's optic nerve just as hard as the narrative shocks their mind.
So, the crucial point is how this chaotic climax resolves. She's down on the floor, totally disoriented. The pale, gaunt figure slowly leans over her. And just as it does, that violent camera shake abruptly drops away, the screen fades to black, and the very last thing we hear is a distorted whisper. The 60-second arc is complete. It began in comfort, rose in tension, and ends in absolute, inescapable darkness.
It is honestly incredible to see how a professional understanding of sound, color, and pacing can completely short-circuit human psychology in under a single minute. It really makes you realize that true cinematic horror isn't just about what's hiding in the shadows, it's about how the filmmaker controls the light you use to look for it. So I'll leave you with this to chew on. If you had just 60 seconds to terrify an audience, how would you manipulate the darkness? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, guys, and definitely keep your flashlights fully charged.